DC Comics have a pantheon of amazing characters that are all awesome in their own way, but their most popular superhero, and my personal favourite of theirs, has to be the Caped Crusader himself, Batman. First introduced in Detective Comics number 27 all the way back in 1939, Batman is one of the most iconic and enduring characters in all of fiction, being the second most profitable superhero of all time, and just being an all-around fantastic addition to the medium of comic books. Just about every facet of entertainment imaginable has been impacted in some way by this comic book giant's existence, and he is often listed as one of the greatest fictional characters in history, appearing in a multitude of comic books, films, TV shows, video games, and pretty much anything else you can think of. With legions of people around the world enjoying content involving the character and claiming he can beat everyone and their mum with enough prep time, Batman has enjoyed the adornment of critics and fans everywhere for almost a century at this point. And although I don't subscribe to the argument that Batman is completely indestructible, I am a humongous fan of the character. Yeah, it will come as no surprise to anyone who knows me in real life that Batman is one of my favourite superheroes, coming only second to a certain red and blue spandex-clad webhead, and one of my favourite fictional characters in general. I've been a fan of Batman for so long that I actually can't even remember the first time I saw the character. My guess is that it would have been either the Batman-Superman movie World's Finest, which I watched on VHS repeatedly as a little kid, or maybe the 2004 animated series The Batman, which is really underrated in my opinion. Check it out if you haven't. The character has just been such a constant in my life for such a long period of time that it's hard for me to pinpoint my first memory involving the character. Recently, I've been feeling in a particularly Batman-themed mood. As I started what must be my 1000th playthrough of the Arkham games, I got a chance to see my favourite animated Batman movie on the big screen for the first time, and I've been watching and massively enjoying the recently released Penguin series. The sequel to 2019's Joker also released fairly recently, but yeah, let's not talk about that. With Batman Day passing just a few weeks ago, and the character celebrating his 85th birthday, I found myself jumping down the rabbit hole, throwing myself headfirst into the seemingly bottomless pit of Batman lost media. I say seemingly bottomless because, my goodness, there's a lot of lost media associated with the Batman franchise. There are lost movies, lost video games, lost comics, and a whole load of cancelled and unproduced projects that didn't make it past the conceptual phase. Given how long the character has been around, I guess this shouldn't come as too much of a surprise, but I was still astounded at the number of lost and abandoned projects I found in my research for this video. With the sheer volume of Batman lost media out there, I couldn't possibly cover it all in one video, so I've selected some of the pieces that I found most interesting or that I haven't seen covered extensively elsewhere. So, without further ado, let's get nuts and take a look at some of the projects across the Dark Knight's 85-year history that have gone missing or didn't make it to the end of production and out of the Batcave to begin with. Here's a look at some of the lost and cancelled media of Batman. Fleischer Studios is Batman. For anyone who is a fan of animation, they will know that Max Fleischer's Fleischer Studios have had an enormous impact on the medium of animation, and the studio's Superman cartoons are widely regarded as some of the greatest and most revolutionary cartoons of America's golden age of animation. Released in Technicolor by Paramount between 1941 and 1943, these cartoons were an enormous success, and even had lore implications for the character. These cartoons were the first time we ever see Superman fly, as prior to these shorts, Superman was only able to leap tall buildings in a single bound, as opposed to straight up flying. These shorts are just iconic and have been universally loved by both animation and comic book fans ever since their release. Of course, with such a massive success on their hands, Fleischer became interested in working on another DC character, and they began discussions with DC to potentially work on a project based on Batman. The communication between the two companies even got as far as budget discussions, as evidenced by a letter dated as January 25, 1942, written by David Fleischer. In the letter, Fleischer mentions that the budget was made with 4 shorts in mind, and that these shorts would be live action and in black and white, as opposed to animations like the studio did with Superman. This letter was archived in the memoir of film producer Michael E. Uslan titled The Boy Who Loved Batman, and is the only piece of evidence that mentions the existence of these potential shorts. In the book, Aslan mentions that this project was killed by the advent of the Second World War, although America had already joined the war by the time this letter was written, and Aslan doesn't mention a source for where he got this information, so it could just be purely speculation on his part. It's interesting to me that a studio like Fleischer, that saw massive success with animated Superman shorts, would want to do Batman in live action as opposed to animation. However, this could have been owed to the fact that Superman's powers, and general stories told in Superman comics, would have been much harder to capture in live action, especially at the time. We currently have no concept art, production stills, or other production materials of any kind regarding this mysterious series, and it is currently unknown how far the series got into development before it was scrapped. Aslan also provides no further details on any information he has regarding the shorts in his book, and the whole project is completely shrouded in mystery. It is likely that anything to do with this series, if it even exists, will likely remain buried forever, as anyone associated with the production has likely passed away by now. Given the love and success that the Superman shorts saw, as well as them having an impact on the lore of Superman as a character, I'm very intrigued as to what the plans might have been for this series' take on the Caped Crusaders' adventures. Unfortunately, we'll probably never find out, and it is likely that Fleischer Studios' idea for 4 Batman shorts will remain a mystery. The Gotham by Gaslight video game. While Elseworld stories are a staple of modern day DC comics, back in the 80s they weren't as commonplace as they are now, and this made the 1989 one-shot comic Gotham by Gaslight stand out, as it was DC's first Elseworld story set in an alternate universe from the original DC timeline. For those of you unfamiliar with the comic, Gotham by Gaslight tells the story of an alternate universe version of Batman set in the 19th century, where Bruce Wayne is on a tour of Europe and decides to take up the mantle of Batman when Jack the Ripper begins a series of murders in Gotham. Since its release, the story has gone on to be very popular, often being considered one of DC's best Elseworld stories, and just being one of the best Batman stories in general, going on to spawn a sequel in the form of Batman Master of the Future, and seeing an animated adaptation of the story in 2018. But did you know we almost had a game based on the story? Back in 2009, Chicago-based video game developer Day One Studios, known for making the third iteration of the Fear franchise, alongside now-defunct video game publisher THQ, had plans to develop a video game based on Gotham by Gaslight. However, these plans fell through, and the project was cancelled when THQ passed on the project since they couldn't secure the rights to the intellectual property. Over the years, we've had various bits and pieces from early development of this game released online, such as this concept art by artist Julie Farrell, which shows the steampunk art style the game was going for. Along with this, a video of a prototype for the game was released in 2012 and shows a very early version of the game's gothic world, with a character model of Batman freely exploring it, alongside a few other character models of NPCs. And honestly, this footage looks really cool. I really like the foggy, almost Bloodborne-like atmosphere, and the cape physics on Batman's character model look awesome. The footage shows Batman being able to leap high enough to jump on top of the surrounding buildings, but it can be assumed that the physics for jumping and other actions in the game hadn't been fine-tuned or fully developed yet, which allows Batman to leap tall buildings in a single bound like Superman would. It's a shame that this game never saw its way to completion, as it looks like it could have had a lot of potential. The game actually entered early development the same year that Batman Arkham Asylum released and completely changed the landscape for superhero games as a whole, so it would have been interesting to see what this game would have been like after the release of such a monumental game changer like Arkham Asylum. Alas, it wasn't meant to be, and much like the story it was based on, only lives on as a what-if Elseworlds entry in DC gaming history. CBS's Batman. In the 1960s, live-action superhero shows and films weren't super commonplace or successful, with earlier attempts at bringing superheroes to the screen being met with lukewarm or negative reactions. So when fans of Batman retreated to Adam West's iconic portrayal of the character in the 1966 TV series, they were most likely overjoyed to see the character brought to life, even if the show was campy and goofy by today's standards. I used to watch reruns of this show all the time when I was a kid, and man, I loved it. I still do. This show is just pure cheesy fun, and watching Adam West and Burt Ward doing all sorts of ridiculous things as Batman and Robin never fails to put a smile on my face. But this show was almost not the Batman series we got back in the 1960s. Well, sort of. This is because in the early 1960s, a different Batman series was planned for Saturday mornings on CBS, with Ed Graham Productions at the helm, with former American football player and actor Mike Henry being considered for the role of Batman. Henry had previously played Tarzan in the 1960s trilogy of Tarzan films, and Junior Justice in Smokey and the Bandit. The series would have been more straightforward and serious than the 60s series starring Adam West, and would have been similar in style to the 50s series Adventures of Superman that starred George Reeves as Superman. Supposedly, Henry posed in costume as Batman for a set of publicity stills for the show that have since gone missing, as they were likely discarded when the show was dropped, when DC decided that they wanted to go ahead with the ABC Batman series that we all know and love today. There is an image on the Lost Media Wiki write-up of the series that claims to be a mock-up of what Henry might have looked like in costume as Batman, based off one person's account of what the stills look like. But this image has no source, and it isn't found anywhere else on the internet. The Lost Media Wiki page also doesn't say who this supposed person is whose account the mock-up is based on. Some believe this image may even be AI generated, and yeah, honestly to me it does look a little wonky. Batman seemingly has no left arm, and the belt has this almost cartoonish effect to it, with his cape also looking kind of fuzzy. I don't know, the whole thing just looks kind of off to me. Either way, it's the closest thing we have to the stills for now, and I get the feeling it's all we'll ever have from them. If the stills actually do exist, it's likely they weren't archived when the decision to go ahead with the 1966 Adam West Batman series went ahead. If they were archived, then the only people I can think of that would have them would be a former CBS employee or Paramount, as they are CBS's parent company. Even though I think it's kind of unlikely, I would love if these stills resurfaced one day and we got a look at the alternate version of the 60s Batman series we possibly could have had instead of the Adam West classic. Darren Aronofsky's Batman Year One. After the release of 1997's notoriously awful Batman and Robin, Warner Brothers were looking for a way to reinvent the Batman film franchise and reboot the entire series after all the back credit card and chicks dig the car shenanigans. Of course, these days, we know that the rebooted version of Batman after Batman and Robin ended up being 2005's Batman Begins, which launched Christopher Nolan's incredibly successful and well-received Dark Knight trilogy. However, in the late 90s and early 2000s, another famous director was at work on a version of Batman that would have taken a wildly different direction. For those of you unfamiliar with his work, Darren Aronofsky is a director who's no stranger to controversy, as he tends to make very polarizing films that are often incredibly dark, disturbing, or both, with his most recent film, The Whale, being nominated for multiple Academy Awards. At some point in the late 90s or early 2000s, when Aronofsky was an up-and-coming director, Warner Brothers chose him to reinvent Batman for the big screen through an adaptation of what is widely considered to be one of the greatest Batman graphic novels of all time, Batman Year One, by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. Batman Year One did the very same thing for the comic book incarnation of the character that Warner Brothers wanted it to do with the movie version. By retelling Batman's early days as the Caped Crusader, this story reinvigorated the character after some had felt that his stories had become stale, so this was the perfect comic book to base a new movie on, as people were no longer interested in what Warner Brothers were doing with Batman in the movies. For this film version of the Year One story, Warner Brothers brought in the graphic novel's original writer, Frank Miller, to help Aronofsky write a script for the film that we actually have available today in its entirety online. The script is, yeah, it's definitely something alright. There are a lot of strange changes from the original story, such as changing Alfred to make him an African American man named Little Al, who runs an auto repair shop, completely omitting key characters such as Carmine Falcone from the story, and placing more of an emphasis on Bruce Wayne. During production, Aronofsky supposedly based the script very, very loosely off the comic, stating that, quote, "It's somewhat based on the comic book. Toss out everything you can imagine about Batman. Everything. We're starting completely anew." The ideas that Aronofsky had for the character were so dark that they even caused disagreements between him and Frank Miller. For anyone who knows anything about Miller's take on Batman, you'll know that says a lot, as Miller is known for his incredibly dark take on the character, often blurring the lines between right and wrong for the character and putting his moral compass into question. if Aronofsky's take on the character was too dark for even him to handle, I'm doubtful it would have been one that fans would have gravitated towards, as it likely would have almost been a completely different character in some ways. I'll leave a link to the script in the description below for anyone interested in giving it a read. Interestingly, we do have some very early concept art for this film by artist David Williams that shows us what some of the characters, costumes, vehicles, and gadgets could have looked like, and some of these designs look really cool. Batman's costume in particular looks pretty impressive to me. I could definitely see this working as a design for the character in a movie based on Batman Year One. Ultimately, however, the film went unproduced as Miller stated that Warner Bros. Executives wanted a Batman film that they could take their kids to, and the film was promptly shelved in 2001. Warner Bros. Eventually got their more serious yet child-friendly reboot of Batman in the form of 2005's Batman Begins, which of course was massively successful. One interesting tidbit about Darren Aronofsky's vision for this project is that he actually wanted to cast none other than Joaquin Phoenix in the role of Batman. He confirmed this in an interview given to Empire magazine in 2020, where he stated that, quote, "The studio wanted Freddie Prinze Jr. and I wanted Joaquin Phoenix. I remember thinking, uh-oh, we're making two different films here. That's a true story. It was a different time. The Batman I wrote was definitely a way different type of take than what they ended up making." Ironically enough, Joaquin would of course go on to star as a version of Batman's arch-enemy the Joker in Todd Phillips' 2019 film, Joker, a role which he would win an Oscar for, and one that he would reprise in this year's Joker Folie à Deux. And I don't know about you guys, but I wish that movie was kind of like the Darren Aronofsky Batman film, a strange, unproduced footnote in the history of DC that makes for some interesting reading, but ultimately probably wasn't the best idea. Oh well, a guy can dream, I suppose. Batman the Animated Series, The Dark Knight's First Night audio. So I've spoken about Batman the Animated Series on this channel before in the video about Toonami Lost Media, when we discussed the existence of audio recordings of Tim Curry's performance as the Joker in the series, and while that was an interesting case of lost media, it wasn't always the only piece of lost media to come from this show. For those of you that are somehow unfamiliar, 1992's Batman the Animated Series is considered by many fans to be the definitive on-screen representation of Batman's world and characters, being so successful that it went on to spawn a variety of spin-offs, sequel series, and movies, including 1993's Batman Mask of the Phantasm. A bit of a side note, but I got the opportunity to see Mask of the Phantasm in cinemas this year at a screening for Batman Day, and it was honestly one of the best cinematic experiences I've ever had. Hearing Shirley Walker's amazing score and the iconic performances by both Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill through Dolby Atmos speakers on a giant screen is an experience I'll never forget as a Batman fan. Anyways, before Batman the Animated Series blew up into the massive success we know it as today, it was initially pitched to Fox in 1991, as they were the network that would eventually go on to air the show through their Fox Kids block. One of the methods that the show's creators used to pitch the show to executives before production on the series formally began was a short promotional reel that they created to give an idea of what the animation for the show would look like. Titled The Dark Knight's First Night, the pitch pilot is essentially a slightly more drawn out version of the show's intro, even sharing some pretty identical shots, showing Batman combat some criminals on a rooftop before the police arrive to take them away as Batman departs the scene. The pilot features more fluid and dynamic animation than the final series does, which is pretty common for pitch pilots as they are made to the highest quality to try and entice studios to greenlight shows. It also features no voice acting aside from the policemen saying freeze at the end. The existence of this pilot remained unknown for 12 years until it was released as a bonus feature on a DVD release of the series in 2003. However, before the pilot plays, a message is displayed on screen that states that the original audio track for the pilot was lost and that it has been replaced by the show's main theme. The original audio track is fairly similar to the one on the DVD release, however it uses the Danny Elfman Batman theme from Tim Burton's 1989 film instead of the theme from the actual show, and has slightly different sound effects. This is likely because the show didn't yet have a musical score, as production hadn't started on the full series quite yet. Now, this is the part where the details get a little murky, as at some point the original audio for the pilot was actually found, ending the search and giving this piece of lost media a happy ending. But I'm unsure where the audio track was originally found in the first place. I was able to find YouTube uploads of the pilot as early as 2007 that featured the pilot with its original audio track, but they don't state where they got this version from. There is also a pencil test version of the promo reel uploaded in 2010 that features the original audio track and even has comments from some of the animators who worked on this pilot back in the day. Either way, this makes this slightly different to the other entries on this list, as it has at least been found, and gives us some hope that we might see some of the other entries on this list resurface in some form someday. Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker sequel. While most of the entries on this list centre around the Batman we all know and love, Bruce Wayne, I couldn't make a video about Batman and not talk about one of my favourite additions to the Batman canon, that being the character of Batman Beyond. First debuting in 1999 as a sequel to the original Batman the Animated Series, Batman Beyond follows a new Batman of the year 2039 named Terry McGinnis, who dons the role of Batman after his father is murdered. With the guidance of an aging Bruce Wayne as his mentor, Terry combats various villains, new and old, such as Shriek, Spellbinder, and Blight. On paper, this sounds like a cheap attempt to find a way to continue the animated series while keeping it fresh, but bloody hell was this show good. It goes hand in hand with the animated series and, in my opinion, serves as a perfect follow-up with episodes that even rival the original show in terms of writing and quality in my mind. The character and show was so successful that the world of Batman Beyond has broken out of the realm of television, with Terry appearing in comic books, video games, and even his own feature-length movie titled Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker. As the title would suggest, this movie saw Batman's greatest adversary, the Joker, return in the future to fight Terry and cause havoc in Gotham once again, despite seemingly being defeated by the original Batman several years before the events of this movie. It's now up to Terry to uncover the mystery of how the Joker has returned, while revelations from Bruce's past as Batman are brought to light. This film is just incredible, with a dark and mature tone and one of the best sequences in any piece of Batman media through a flashback. I won't spoil it for anyone who hasn't watched the film, but if you haven't, go wherever you can to watch this movie, it's well worth it. Despite how good the film was, with critics and fans universally singing its praises, it didn't receive a follow-up or sequel of any kind. This was because the film sold poorly on release, since it had to be delayed from its original October release date in 2000 to December of the same year due to the incredibly dark and violent nature of some of the film scenes, with Warner Bros. Objecting to some of the content that was in the film. This resulted in much of the film being heavily edited and censored, with the original version released in December 2000 changing certain scenes to be of a less graphic nature. My guess is that reanimating certain scenes in an already completed film would have cost more than expected, making the low sales even worse than they otherwise would have been. The uncensored version of the film did eventually release, however, 2 years later in 2002. While the film didn't get a sequel, this wasn't for a lack of trying, as revealed by the show's co-creator Bruce Timm, who shared at San Diego Comic-Con in 2019 that plans for a sequel were in the works, revealing some very small details of what they wanted to do with the film. The film would have supposedly featured Catwoman as the main antagonist, and it would have been revealed that she had cloned Bruce Wayne to create Terry McGinnis. Bruce Timm didn't share anything past this, so it's unknown exactly what role Catwoman, this supposed clone of Batman, played in the creation of Terry, or just what the wider plot of the film was in general. While this clone revelation for Terry wasn't revealed in a sequel to Return of the Joker, as this film was never made, it was later expanded on in the Justice League Unlimited episode Epilogue, where it is revealed that Amanda Waller used Bruce Wayne's DNA to create Terry by overwriting Terry's father's reproductive DNA with that of Bruce's. I honestly hated this reveal when I first saw it in Justice League Unlimited. It cheapens Terry's story, changing him from someone who took on the mantle of Batman because he wanted to and earned it throughout the series, to just making it his birthright, so I'm unsure how well this movie would have landed with me if they went a similar route to the Justice League Unlimited episode. As stated before though, the film was never made and didn't make it past much more than a basic idea for a general story. There are no production materials or scripts of any kind that were created for this film, as it didn't make it anywhere near that stage of production, and we have no further details of what else the film may have entailed. While I'm sad that we didn't get a sequel to Return of the Joker, as it's one of my favourite animated Batman movies, I'm kind of glad that this particular idea for a sequel didn't get made, as I never really gelled with the idea of Terry being related to Bruce anyways. Even so, it makes for some interesting thinking of what could have been for a sequel to this underrated DC animated gem that I'd highly recommend anyone watching this video checks out if they haven't already. Flying Black Batman. Okay, so this one is a weird one. I don't even really know if this counts as a piece of lost media, but it's so obscure and I can find almost no information about it online, so there's a possibility that it may be lost to anyone outside of China, as I can't find archives of it anywhere on the internet. Regardless, let's get into exactly what this thing was, and you guys can decide for yourselves if it counts as a piece of lost media. Flying Black Batman is a 1962 manhua, which is a term used for Chinese comics. It supposedly adopted the plotline and characters from the early Batman comics created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger, and was drawn by an artist named Ho Yak Kwan, who has drawn other manhua such as Clean Face Conqueror, Super Black Conqueror, and Atomic 7, which in itself was a rip-off of DC's Justice League. The information I found on this strange comic comes from two websites. The first is a site called lambiek.net, a website run by the owners of the Lambiek comic store, which is a comic book store in Amsterdam that touts itself as being Europe's first comic shop. I'm pretty sure this information originates from a book called Hong Kong Comics, A History of Manhua, as the page from this book that features Flying Black Batman pretty much features the exact same information as the Lambiek page. The only real information these sources offer is what I've told you already, that this comic was a rip-off of the original Batman comics, and that it apparently sold pretty well, being number 2 in sales. The book also mentions that there were rip-offs of other American heroes, such as Spider-Man and Superman, however I wasn't able to find any information on those in my research. Maybe that's a rabbit hole that should be left untouched until a future video. The second website where I was able to find information about this comic was a website called hkmemory.org. This website contains information about a lot of Chinese comic books, including Flying Black Batman. The preview images on this page are in black and white and feature some interesting characters like this giant chicken and this fella here with an interesting haircut. His barber is definitely getting paid way too much. My guess is that the colour images on the Lambiek page are the covers, which were done in colour so they were more visually appealing and would attract a wider audience, while the comics themselves were in black and white, kind of similar to a lot of Japanese manga releases. One thought that came to mind is that there is a possibility that the Lambiek store has a copy of this rare and obscure manhua, and that they scanned the images from their own copy to use for the article, which would explain where they came from. The images they use are definitely different to those seen on hkmemory.org. Have a look at them side by side here. I can't tell what it is, but there's definitely something different about them. Maybe it's the lighting or something like that, but I'm pretty sure that these are scanned images of the original comics. Outside of this information, there is nothing else I can find online to even account for this mysterious comic's existence. Unless someone unearths a copy from their own collection, or it was re-released in some sort of archive of manhua, it is likely the rest of this comic will remain buried in China, and we won't get to see what else we missed out on with this strange Chinese clone of Batman. The Batman vs. Hush. The Batman vs. Hush was a planned film based on the 2004 animated series The Batman, which would have adapted the infamous Batman Hush storyline, released between October 2002 and September 2003. Following Batman the animated series was no small feat, but I feel like 2004's The Batman managed to pull it off, and stick the landing pretty successfully, as it lasted for 5 seasons and got one direct-to-TV movie titled The Batman vs. Dracula. And no, this isn't the infamous lost films Batman Dracula or Batman Fights Dracula. Those have been covered to death on YouTube, so I thought it'd be best to leave them off this list. Instead, this film sees the 2004 animated incarnation of Batman crossing over with Count Dracula from the Bram Stoker novel of the same name, with Batman facing off against Dracula when he is accidentally resurrected by the Penguin. The film received good reviews, with most fans and critics sharing the opinion that the movie is pretty decent. The writer and producer of the series and the film, Alan Burnett, shared his excitement for the success of the series in an interview with the fan site worldsfinestonline.com, and shared that he was interested in possibly making 2 more direct-to-TV films for The Batman after The Batman vs. Dracula, with one of these films likely being titled The Batman vs. Hush. Details on this film are scarce, and its existence remained unknown until 2013, when the poster for the film was posted on the Legions of Gotham message boards by a user named Matt. In his post, he included the image of the poster created by Jeff Matsuda, chief character designer on the series, and he stated that Jeff was good friends with Jeff Loeb, the writer of Batman Hush, and that from day one of working on the series, he was hoping to get the character of Hush into the show, with the poster serving as a pitch art to try and convince Warner Brothers to make a movie featuring the character. The artwork shows a beaten and bruised Batman surrounded by various villains from the series, including Catwoman, the Joker, the Penguin, the Riddler, Mr. Freeze, and Clayface, with Hush standing ominously in the background. I was unable to find many more details about the user who uploaded this image on the message board and how he was able to obtain it, so if anyone knows any more information about who this Matt guy is and if he was related to the production of the show, feel free to let me know in the comments. Currently, this is the only known piece of evidence we have to account for this film's existence, and it's unknown how far into production the film got before it was abandoned. It is also unknown why the film was scrapped to begin with, although it isn't too hard to guess. The Hush storyline is incredibly dark, and I don't think DC liked the idea of the character appearing in the series made for kids, even asking Alan Burnett to replace him with an original character called Rumour in the season 4 episode Rumours, which originally planned to feature Hush as the main villain. He was also a relatively new character at the time, only being a few years old when the show first started. I reckon DC shut the idea down, however that is entirely speculation on my part, as there's no evidence to suggest this. It also would have been hard to do the Hush story without Harvey Dent, who never made an appearance in this series, likely due to him appearing in the Dark Knight trilogy, which was being made at the same time that this show was airing. While I can't imagine it being very accurate, I am very intrigued to see how this show would have handled Hush's storyline. As I said at the beginning of the video, this was one of the first versions of Batman that I ever saw, and I would have loved to have seen another film with him, regardless of how inaccurate or even good it was. We did eventually get an animated adaptation of Batman Hush in 2019, and while that movie has its moments, the ending really kills it for me. I can't imagine this film based on the 2004 animated series would have fared much better, but I would have been interested in seeing it nonetheless. The Dark Knight video game. So for the two people watching this video that somehow are blissfully unaware, 2008's The Dark Knight served as the second part of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy and is widely considered to be one of the best Batman movies and films of any kind ever made. Personally speaking, this is my favourite Batman movie ever. The way the film explores both Batman and the Joker's moral codes and takes elements from some of my favourite comic book stories, such as The Long Halloween, just made me fall in love with this impeccably crafted masterpiece when I first saw it back in cinemas in 2008. Another massive part of The Dark Knight I enjoyed was the hype and build up to the release of the film, with there being merchandise galore for kids like me at the time. Seriously, I still want to get my hands on a stealth launch Batmobile one day. All 2008 kids can probably agree with me there. Interestingly, something that was notably absent from The Dark Knight's release was the existence of a tie-in video game based on the film. The film's predecessor, Batman Begins, had a tie-in game which released in summer of 2005, the same year that the movie hit cinemas. However, its sequel strangely didn't get the same treatment, to the surprise of many gaming journalists. Or so they thought. Yeah, it turns out that there was actually a video game based on The Dark Knight that was secretly in development, intended for release alongside the film for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. Titled Batman The Dark Knight, the game was to be developed by Pandemic Studios, famous for the original Star Wars Battlefront games, with plans for EA to publish the game as they did with Batman Begins. The game's existence was rumoured for several months, but was outright confirmed by Commissioner Gordon actor Gary Oldman in a 2008 interview with G4. Oldman mentioned that he'd seen a little of the game, and that a lot of emphasis was placed on Batman's ability to glide around Gotham, with the developers wanting it to feel seamless and like the gliding wasn't interrupting the flow of gameplay. So, what went wrong for this game to never see the light of day? Well, planning for the game began as early as September 2006, before principal photography on the film had even commenced, with Pandemic assigning the game to their Brisbane branch. They initially began working on a prototype of the game that was linear and similar in style to the Batman Begins game. Since Pandemic didn't yet have any material from the film, their main focus at this point in development was to design the graphical style of the game, as well as start on some of the mechanics such as the physics of gliding. While Pandemic Brisbane worked on the Dark Knight game, Pandemic's Los Angeles office was working on a new game engine called Odin for the studio's next title, The Saboteur, a 2009 open-world action-adventure game that was set in German-occupied France during the Second World War. The Saboteur, being an open-world action-adventure game utilising Odin's engine, would prove to be very important for The Dark Knight, as Pandemic had decided that they wanted to shift direction from a linear game to an open-world game, as they felt that an open-world game would better suit Christopher Nolan's interpretation of Gotham City. This would have made Batman The Dark Knight the first open-world Batman game ever made. However, this shift in direction would be the main catalyst that would lead to the game's eventual demise, as when Pandemic began to move assets from The Dark Knight into the Odin engine, it caused a myriad of technical issues, with the game's performance dropping to the point where it was completely unplayable. Simply loading Batman's character model into the engine and attempting to control him would drop the game's performance as low as 5 frames per second, which was already bad enough, but it became even worse when importing any other characters in, which would cause the game to completely crash out and die. These problems caused delays in the game's development, to the point where it was not possible for the game to be released alongside the film in July of 2008. However, not all hope was lost quite yet, as EA delayed the project to December of 2008 so that it could coincide with the film's home media release. Despite this, development troubles continued, with the performance issues still persisting, along with various other bugs and issues that plagued the game's development. Due to all of the development issues and the growing news coverage on the game after Gary Oldman revealed its existence in the G4 interview, Pandemic was under massive pressure to get the game finished. To remedy this, EA went all in on the project, resulting in a development team that had over 100 members trying to salvage what they could from the game. However, this proved to be futile, as it became clear that the project would not meet its December 2008 release date, and EA pulled the plug on the project, cancelling it in October of 2008. In terms of content we have from this game's time in development, we do have some footage of what the world would have looked like, which has probably been used quite a bit in this part of the video, and some concept art courtesy of online video game archival site Unseen64. A lot of this footage was showcased in Did You Know Gaming's video on the topic, which was uploaded to YouTube in February of 2016, which revealed some other details of the game's time in development. We don't have any leaked builds from the game in any sort of playable state, so we've never been able to see exactly what state the game was in before EA decided to abandon it and shut down production. This game's cancellation had quite a big impact on EA, Pandemic, and Batman in general. Due to the game's cancellation, EA reportedly lost out on $100 million of potential revenue by not having a tie-in video game release alongside the film, and they subsequently shut down Pandemic's Brisbane branch shortly after they ended development on the project. The game not being released also caused The Dark Knight to be the first theatrically released live-action Batman movie to release without a tie-in video game, with it also being the only film in the Dark Knight trilogy to not receive a tie-in game, as The Dark Knight Rises had a mobile game developed by Gameloft, which kind of looks like a bootleg Arkham game. EA chose not to renew their license for the Batman IP, and the rights reverted back to Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment, who would go on to release the critically acclaimed Batman Arkham series. It only took an extra 3 years and some rights moving around, but Warner Bros. And Rocksteady would finally give Batman fans the open-world game they deserved in the form of 2011's Batman Arkham City, the first Batman video game which would let you freely explore Gotham City, and a game which likely wouldn't have existed if this game based on the 2008 masterpiece, The Dark Knight, was completed. Batman Unchained. We've already spoken about the failings of Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin earlier in this video, and it's been talked about to death on the internet, but as a fan of Batman, and just films in general, I feel that it's my duty to rag on this horrible mess of a film more than I already have, especially considering that I kinda actually like its predecessor, Batman Forever. Look, I know it's not exactly high art, but damn it has some really great moments, and it's a ton of fun. Heck, it could have been even better if Warner Bros. Allowed Joel Schumacher to release his cut of the film. Maybe I'll make a separate video on that someday, but despite all the flack it gets, Batman Forever was at least considered a box office success, unlike its sequel, Batman and Robin, which cost more to make than Batman Forever did, yet grossed less than that film, most likely because of how badly received the film was at the time. And this failing is where the subject we're talking about today comes into play, as prior to the failure of Batman and Robin, there's actually another Batman film planned as a sequel to Batman and Robin that would have seen Joel Schumacher return as director for a 5th film in the original series of Batman movies, titled Batman Unchained. Sometimes incorrectly referred to as Batman Triumphant, Batman Unchained would have been the culmination of the original 4 Batman films that started with Tim Burton's 1989 film and ended with Batman and Robin, and it would have seen both George Clooney and Chris O'Donnell return as Batman and Robin, along with Alicia Silverstone as Batgirl, who was introduced in Batman and Robin. The film also would have seen the introduction of 2 new villains, with plans for both Harley Quinn and Scarecrow to make their debuts in this film, with plans for Harley Quinn to be played by Courtney Love, while the role of Scarecrow was actually formally offered to Nicolas Cage. Okay, I don't care what else happens in the outline for this movie, Nicolas Cage as Scarecrow sounds incredible, and making this movie would have been worth it alone to see that performance. I'm so bummed that this casting never came to be. A script for the film was written by screenwriter Mark Protosevich, the screenwriter behind films such as I Am Legend and the Old Boy remake. With regards to the 2 villains of the film, instead of being a psychiatrist who is hopelessly in love with the Joker, Harley would have been a toy maker and the Joker's daughter in this version, trying to get revenge on Batman for the death of the Joker. Scarecrow would have teamed up with Harley to try and drive Batman insane, locking him in Arkham Asylum and exposing him to various hallucinations caused by Scarecrow's fear toxin, with Batman learning to conquer fear and to confront the demons of his past. These demons would have included the return of every villain from the past movies up to Batman Forever, with a very ambitious plan to get all of the actors to return. That's right, they wanted Michelle Pfeiffer, Tommy Lee Jones, Jim Carrey, Danny DeVito, and yes, even Jack Nicholson himself to all come back to reprise their roles as their respective characters from the previous films. I've got no clue how they would have handled this budget-wise, as all of these actors are huge stars and likely would have wanted paychecks to match their star power, a sentiment which director Joel Schumacher shared as he told Protosevich that he had written the most expensive scene of his career. The heroes of the film also would have gone through some changes, with Robin abandoning Batman due to disagreements he had, but he would have returned in the final battle of the film, presumably as Nightwing, the persona he takes on after he leaves Batman in the comic books. We also would have seen Batman's psyche explored, with the hallucinations being used as a conduit to show Batman finally conquering the demons of his past. The film supposedly would have ended with Batman going on a trip to Bali, entering a cave full of bats with them flying around him, which would have served as a visual representation of Batman conquering his fears. The aforementioned script for this film was written while Batman and Robin was still being filmed, with plans for the majority of the cast and crew from Batman Forever and Batman and Robin to return for this film, with the exception of writer Akiva Goldsman, who turned down the opportunity to write the next Batman movie. The film was aiming for a release around 1999, however after Batman and Robin was considered a critical and commercial disappointment as it failed to outgross any of its predecessors, along with George Clooney and Joel Schumacher no longer being interested in making another Batman film, the film was cancelled, with Warner Bros. Deciding to take an alternative route with reviving the Batman film franchise. Interestingly, elements from this movie have seemingly seeped into various other Batman projects. A scene in Batman Begins where Bruce enters the Batcave and lets various bats fly around him may have been directly inspired by Mark Protasevich's script, given how similar it is to the scene that was described there, both visually and thematically. The 2015 video game Batman Arkham Knight also explores similar themes to what this film would have, with Scarecrow as the main villain and the Joker appearing to Batman as hallucinations after his death. This could be a complete coincidence, but it would be interesting if both of these projects were inspired by this scrapped film. As for the actual script itself, it has never surfaced online, making it a piece of lost media, although there are various fakes and fan-made versions of the script available on the web. All of the details we have from the script come from details Protasevich has shared over the years in various different interviews, so it is likely that he still has a copy of it stored away somewhere, as well as Warner Bros. Possibly keeping a copy of it in their ever-elusive vault. I would have been really interested to see what this film would have been like, as it was said that it would return to a darker tone similar to that of Batman 1989 and Batman Returns, as opposed to the goofier tone of the latter two films. Seeing as it would have been a return to form for the series, I think it could have allowed Schumacher to show us his interpretation of a more serious Batman, whose sole existence wasn't just to sell action figures and merchandise, and could have served as a fitting end to this classic film franchise. Nevertheless, the majority of what this film held remains a secret, and it's a real shame that the original Batman movies won't ever get the true triumphant ending that they deserved.
I didn't anticipate when I started how passionate people are about Batman. There's a really unique connection there. Because it's not like that for Superman or Wonder Woman or The Flash. It's different with Batman. And I think the reason is that because of all the superheroes, he's the only one who's actually not a superhero. There's nothing supernatural about Batman. You know what I mean? He can't fly. He can't see through walls. He's a man. He's a human being. He's more like a detective. Some people actually call him the great detective. But not only is he human, he's a very flawed human. And he knows he's flawed. He's been damaged by life. But Kevin, we're all flawed, right? And we all get damaged by life. So it makes Batman that much more relatable because he's so much like us in a way. What distinguishes him is that no matter what life throws at him, no matter what crisis or challenge or failure, he never lets it crush him. He never lets it make him angry or bitter. He takes that pain that life throws at him and he turns it into something positive. And he gives it back to the world as love. Because his whole mission is to leave the world better than he found it. And it's the nobility of that mission. That's what we admire so much about him. But that's something we can all aspire to in our lives. You don't have to have superpowers to want to give to the people in your life, to want to leave the world a better place. All you have to do is care enough to try. Care enough to want to. Because, Kevin, everybody faces challenges in life. Everybody faces disappointment, crisis, failure at something, at some time, because we're human and we all need help at one time or another. Everybody on this planet stumbles at one time or another. But that's not what defines us. What defines us is how we get back up and learn from our mistakes and get back into life and contribute. You have no control over what fate throws at you. You don't know what's coming tomorrow or next month. Life throws curveballs at everybody. But what you do have control over is how you react to those curveballs. You can let them crush you and make you bitter. Or you can learn from them and take that knowledge and get back into life. And I tell you, when you face those challenges, you realize really quickly what's truly important. And it isn't the material stuff. That stuff can disappear in a heartbeat. What's truly important are the people in your life. The lives you touch and the people who touch your life. That is priceless. And remember, Kevin, it's not who you are underneath. It's what you do that defines you. I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.